All right, just in the nick of time, about a minute before the 2024 trade deadline hit, the 49ers have executed another trade. They're aggressive every year, and typically they've gone after defensive linemen. The 49ers have traded with the Houston Texans, a team that has a coaching staff that's very, very familiar to San Francisco, for defensive tackle Khalil Davis. Now, we knew that the 49ers were on the market for a defensive tackle. We also know that I'm at an airport. I'm at Washington, D.C. I don't fly out to San Francisco till like 7:30 Eastern time tonight. This is why, because I was waiting for a trade, so I wouldn't be in the air when it happened, so I could go live right away. I could tell you about Khalil Davis. I've already been texting with one of his former coaches from back in the day who told me a little bit about him as a player. Good motor on the inside, really good athleticism for Khalil Davis, and he joins a long list now of 49ers defensive linemen that have joined the team via trade before the deadline. In 2020, it was Jordan Willis. The 49ers certainly did not regret that. That was a seventh round pick swap with the New York Jets. In 2021, it was Charles Omenihu with the Houston Texans. That was a sixth round pick that the 49ers sent to Houston. And then in 2023, it was both Randy Gregory and Chase Young. They both became productive players for the 49ers at the edge rushing position. Here in 2024, it's Khalil Davis, the 28-year-old that the 49ers have picked up, again from the Houston Texans, although a different regime. The price for this, a seventh round pick, 2026 draft. So the 49ers didn't even have to use one of their draft picks here from 2025 coming up. It's going to be a seventh round pick from the 2026 draft for San Francisco. They potentially will have 11 picks in the 2025 draft, and this team has drafted very well. The most recent exhibit might be their most successful one. That was the eight player class that San Francisco put together in the 2024 draft. That class showed the value of these picks, of holding on to as many as possible in the short run. You don't want to burn sixth, seventh round picks, even fifth round picks. You don't want to burn those kind of picks and act like they mean nothing, because they have turned into players like Brock Purdy. The fourth round type of picks have turned into players like Malik Mustafa. I could go on and on. The 49ers have obviously drafted really well in the mid to later rounds. So it was important to them, if they could, to hold on to as many picks as possible in 2025. And they've held on to all of their 2025 picks. This is a 2026 seventh round pick for Khalil Davis, who joins a long list of 49ers trade acquisitions under Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch along the defensive line. It was very obvious that the 49ers needed to add a defensive tackle rotationally. I don't think that this team has glaring holes that need a starting caliber player anywhere, even at receiver, where they've lost Brandon Ayuk to an ACL tear. The 49ers are very deep, and I think still very strong, with a lot of potential upward mobility with Ricky Pearsall and Jacob Cowing, the rookies really starting to catch some wind behind their sails. But the injury to Javon Hargrave, even though he might be back for the postseason with the torn triceps muscle, combined with the fact that the 49ers actually rank around the 20s in EPA per play against the run, that's their biggest statistical weakness, is run defense. That is what really, I think, encouraged the team to hang in there and try to make a trade for more depth at that defensive tackle position. The 49ers have a track record of succeeding with these types of trades, because Chris Kasarik has been able to identify the skill set that he wants for the wide nine, plug it in, and allow players to play their most successful football with the 49ers. In the case of Khalil Davis, this is a guy who was an elite athlete at his position coming out of Nebraska. In a little bit, I'll cut up a video before my flight here. When I'm not live, I'll cut up a video that has some graphics for you. But he ran a 4.75 40 coming out of Nebraska, which is extremely good for a player who's 315 pounds at that defensive tackle position. He's got a 32.5-inch vertical leap, which is also really good, and a 1.66 10-yard split. So he can go ahead and race Brock Purdy in the 10-yard split. That could be fun. Again, the coach who I spoke to, talking about Khalil Davis's game, talked about him being stout in the middle, somebody who you can put in there and potentially gobble up some double teams. Although I think that's the part of the game that Khalil Davis is continuing to develop at. He played in a lower league, I believe the USFL, before he signed with the Texans. He's been in the league now for a few years between the NFL and the other lower pro leagues. As I mentioned, he was a product of Nebraska, a 6th-round pick, where the athleticism was very, very pronounced coming out of college. The 49ers now are going to look to turn the athleticism and some of the complimentary words that we've heard about Khalil Davis from his former coaches, obviously from the Houston Texans, who have dealt closely with the 49ers coaching staff with DeMeco Ryans in charge there. They're going to try to turn that into more production. Last year for the Texans, Davis had over 200 snaps. And that means that he's been, and that was a good Texans team last year. Those guys were able to win some games. They obviously seem to be a year ahead of schedule under DeMeco Ryan. So he is a player who has proven that he can deliver at the NFL level. And the 49ers have needed that rotational piece in their defensive line, especially at the middle of it. I think that schematic familiarity is so important, especially if you're trying to plug and play a player into the lineup. The 49ers play with a certain style that the Houston Texans also play with. DeMeco Ryans saw success with it in San Francisco. So then when he was hired as the Texans coach and the main architect of their defense, he brought it there. And his team a little bit more set at the defensive tackle position than the 49ers. So this swap made sense, Houston getting that 7th-round pick and some salary cap relief this season, because the 49ers will handle about half of Khalil Davis's contract. So they're going to be paying him about $500,000 or so, a little bit more than that for this 2024 season. I can see, just when I look at the strategy here and I hear some of the whispers around this trade, you can see how the Texans might have been interested in somebody like Spencer Burford, but I don't think the 49ers wanted to give up a young offensive lineman. Offensive linemen are in much shorter supply than defensive linemen are in this league. That's just how it is at the trade deadline. It's much more rare to trade for an offensive lineman just because of that market misbalance. So we predicted that the 49ers would trade for a defensive lineman, probably a defensive tackle. We were correct about that. And, it's not surprising if the Texans did want an offensive lineman like Spencer Burford in return, but the 49ers were not about to do that. The 49ers held out until the very last minute to see if the Texans did want to salvage some draft capital for a player who was getting some snaps for them. He got up to 35 snaps in the game, but was averaging about, outside of the outliers, about 15 to 20 snaps per game. The 49ers obviously could put more use to Khalil Davis on their team than the Houston Texans. Now, he's not to be confused with Kalia Davis. The 49ers now have a Khalil Davis and a Kalia Davis on their roster. They got both of these guys, Khalil and Kalia. So don't get that messed up. I could see that being a little confusing since San Francisco also has both of these players at the same exact position, defensive tackle. But if you look at the tackle room for the 49ers right now, depth-wise, yes, Kalia Davis is in there. Somebody like Kevin Givens has been playing really good football this year. He's developed for San Francisco the most pass rushing productivity that we've seen from Kevin Givens. They also have Evan Anderson, who they just called up and promoted full-time from the practice squad, who has been good over a limited amount of snaps. But where this is really interesting is along the starting line, because Malik Collins also played for Houston last year. 49ers traded for him over the offseason. That was a much splashier trade over the offseason, right? Malik Collins coming over, the veteran. He's been good for the 49ers in the middle. Malik Collins was with Khalil Davis in Houston last season. So you talk about scheme familiarity. There's also teammate familiarity. And as I said, Khalil Davis played over 200 snaps for the 49ers, for the Texans last year. So he definitely played and has some chemistry with Malik Collins that should be beneficial in the 49ers rotation. So this is me talking the strategy of how this might fit for San Francisco in their defensive line room. And I think that the Texans connection is obviously very, very important. That is a big data point in this situation. Big picture wise, we didn't expect the 49ers to make drastic moves. We said that defensive line was likely. Defensive tackle was the likeliest of the positions on the defensive line, although we wouldn't have ruled out edge rusher either. It does seem that some teams were reluctant to trade this year, such as maybe the Miami Dolphins. Maybe Chris Grier, their general manager, wasn't quite convinced that the Dolphins are out of contention. So the 49ers went to the bargain bin again, as they have in the past. Again, Jordan Willis in 2020, Charles Omenihu in 2021, Randy Gregory in 2023. You could even argue that Chase Young was a bargain bin pickup, although he was more expensive as he cost a third-round pick last season. But they went back to the bargain bin with Khalil Davis to satisfy the need that they thought that they had along the defensive line. Bottom of the line is that this 49ers team is performing efficiently on both sides of the ball, more so on offense than defense. But overall, defensively, this is a top half performer with the biggest weakness, the run defense. The pass defense for San Francisco has been, I think, at the cornerback position downright excellent this year, especially with Charvarius Ward having turned it on over the past two games. Obviously, he's going to be dealing with the aftermath of the personal tragedy following the death of his one-year-old daughter. But that cornerback room for San Francisco has been impressive. They have had a weakness at the second and third linebacker spots, which is obvious because Dre Greenlaw is still not back. But that leads me to the next point. The 49ers' biggest acquisitions over the second half of the season have been expected to be and will be guys who are already in their building. Christian McCaffrey, practice window opened yesterday. He should give the 49ers a big, big boost on the offensive side of the ball, where they're ranked number 6. They want to get it up to number 3, number 2, number 1, somewhere in that range. I think they believe Christian McCaffrey can help them do that, since Kyle Shanahan has called him the NFL MVP. Now, the defense, the DVOA, I think, is number 6 or number 7. The EPA rank is number 12. That's defense adjusted value over average and expected points added per play. So that's a more sophisticated measurement than just points and yards. So they're between 6 and 12 defensively, with the biggest weakness being the run defense, since we've talked about the cornerback position being really good and the linebacker position being potentially fortified coming up here with Dre Greenlaw. So if you want to take the run defense to another step, then you have to focus on some of those positions where, you know, these positions are a little less sexy to talk about, right? Defensive tackle is a spot where the stats aren't going to be as prolific, because it's going to be more about eating up double teams, more about schematically holding the fort in the middle, setting stuff up with wins and with physical play in the interior of that defense, in the mess of the middle, for the linebackers to fire against the run, for the defensive ends to make some tackles. So that naturally, because that was the 49ers' biggest statistical weakness, was where they were probably going to add, and probably going to add with the greatest amount of value. And I think that trading for a player who you believe can immediately fit into your rotation, who immediately can contribute to this team at the cost of only a 7th-round pick in 2026, I think that is some almost automatic value for the 49ers. I go back to Willis, pick swap in 2020. That was a 7th-round pick swap. Omenihu, that was a 6th-round pick that the 49ers sent Houston in 2021. Those were both value picks. Those both did pay off for the 49ers. Also, the contractual status of Khalil Davis is interesting here, because he's going to be a restricted free agent at the end of this season, which means that the 49ers will have some level of contractual optionality with Khalil Davis. If he ends up playing very well for them, say that he plays like Charles Omenihu did when he came over from Houston in 2021. Omenihu still had another year on top of 2021 under contract with the 49ers, so that was a big asset. Khalil Davis, they don't have that kind of control, but they do have some potential options in case he really delivers for them on the inside. As a restricted free agent, they can slap the tender on him of varying levels. So even the lowest level tender would give the 49ers some optionality that you wouldn't have if you were trading for somebody who's going to become a free agent. The sun is shining here on my face. I got to change spots. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. I had to move a little bit. We're at the airport here in Washington, D.C. I decided that I can't fly back during the trade deadline because then I wouldn't be able to make videos about the 49ers and whatever else was happening in the National Football League. So the decision was made to just hang out in airport lounges and at the airport for several hours, have the phone, have the mic, and wait to see if the 49ers made a move before the deadline. They did so with about a minute left, and then go on and analyze from there. I'm going to drag my computer over here. Maybe we can open up the laptop, set up the tripod, make something like an impromptu studio over here as we talk about what the 49ers might do next. I'm going to we just have a lot of viewers, so I don't want to end the show prematurely. So here we go, tripod. Let's see if this works. We are getting very, very creative on the channel right now. It's one of those soft seats, so I don't know if this is going to work, guys. Oh, this will. Here we go. All right. Nice. All right, let's talk Niners. Let's get the laptop out and go from there. This mic has been an absolute godsend. And although this setup is probably the most makeshift setup that I've ever encountered, it will work. Beautiful. Trade deadline day, election day, Washington, D.C. airport. If anybody's in this airport, you could find me and join me on the show, although I hope you don't. Let's see if Washington Dulles has good Wi-Fi. It did earlier. The heat of the moment, we could go to the Wi-Fi right now. Perfect. There we go. Yeah, the setup works. Like I said, I'm dedicated. I will stay in airports for 8+ hours and skip flights back to San Francisco just so we can have a show that brings you the latest 49ers intel. So 4.75 for Khalil Davis, a 1.66 10-yard split, and a 32.5-inch vertical. All really, really good numbers for somebody who weighs 315 pounds. We're gonna try something new here. This is his relative athletic score. Can you guys see this? Green is good, red is bad. So there's an elite component to the relative athletic score for Khalil Davis, and it lies in the speed, in the 40-yard dash, the 20-yard split, and the 10-yard split. So they have the GTFO metric. I mean, get the F off the ball. Chris Kasarik yells it a lot of practice. They want defensive linemen who fire off the ball in the 4-3 or extremely aggressive. The Houston Texans played things in a similar way. So the 49ers, I'm sure, conversed with Houston staff, said, hey, we've watched this guy's tape. Does he play like this in practice? Does he show this? I mean, green is good. The red part of this that's poor is the height. He's only 6'1", so typically, you'd want a little bit of a higher, taller player. But I think in this situation, the 49ers are okay with the lower center of gravity to work against the run. But they communicate with the Texans in all likelihood here. They talk about Khalil Davis's ability to burst off the football, to fire off the snap, and the metrics. Can't undersell these. The metrics definitely were something that the 49ers like. Now, I also have the 49ers depth chart. This is up right now. You can go check it out. I always link it on my Twitter. But when we look at the defensive tackle position, it's Malik Collins and Jordan Elliott at the top for the 49ers. Khalil Davis, Kevin Givens behind those two, and then Khalil Davis and Evan Anderson as 5 and 6. There's a chance that somebody like Kevin Givens has been fighting through a groin injury. I don't know if he's going to be ready to go for the 49ers next game against Tampa Bay on Sunday. We'll find out a lot more at practice tomorrow. That's why I'm flying back to San Francisco. But they currently will have 6 defensive tackles on the 53-man roster, which is a lot, but probably not too many, because there might be some injury situations that the 49ers have to skate through here in the very near future, and almost certainly they're going to have some depth issues that they have to overcome over a longer period of time. I would say in the larger scheme of things, it wasn't the most active NFL trade deadline. There wasn't anything all too splashy. I mean, I would say that the biggest move that we saw was Marshawn Lattimore, right, from the Saints coming here to Washington, D.C. Was a fairly expensive trade for the Commanders, but this is something that I illustrated up on the channel as well. And, this is cool because now I could show you some stuff, some graphics. This right here, this is our XY chart. So as you can see, and I don't know, hopefully this is not reversed in a way that's impossible to read, but the 49ers are in the upper right barely. They want to improve the defense. They want to move it further up the Y-axis. Look where Washington and Baltimore are. Washington and Baltimore both have great offenses, but poor defenses, at least according to the efficiency this year. They're both in the same spot of this graph. And I just happened to be at the airport near both of those cities, Washington, Dulles, near Washington and Baltimore. I flew into Baltimore, believe it or not. So Washington and Baltimore both traded for a cornerback. Tre'Davious White is headed to Baltimore from the Rams, and Marshawn Lattimore is headed from the Saints to the Washington Commanders, where Adam Peters is the general manager. So both of those teams are trying to improve the defense, move it further up the Y-axis to become legitimate contenders. The Detroit Lions, who are in the upper right, they think they've upgraded their defense. They needed to because they lost Aiden Hutchinson, so they picked up Zadarius Smith, about the number 22 ranked edge rusher in pass rush productivity. Aiden Hutchinson was number 1. Zadarius Smith is around where we saw Leonard Floyd rank at the bye week for the 49ers. He was number 24. So the Lions have picked up some slack, but they haven't picked up all the slack that they lost with the Aiden Hutchinson injury. I will say, for the 49ers to overcome the Detroit Lions, you can see where the Lions are with their logo right there in the upper right. For the 49ers to overcome the Lions, it's not going to be about winning the 49ers hope it's about winning a shootout because Brock Purdy is better than Jared Goff. But to me, it's more about making sure the Lions don't grab a stranglehold on the football game through the run game. Detroit has the best run game in the league, and the 49ers have a run defense that has ranked in the bottom half because I think they still needed more beef on the inside. And
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please?
sorry,
Dear all Saudi passengers traveling on SV36,
we got a
non-stop
announcement
services
here at the
Jeddah.
airport.
As you guys know, today is a full flight, and we ask that you take out any
I think
important
there's a flight
documents
to
or
Saudi
anything
Arabia
that is
from where
inside
I'm
your
sitting here. They
carry-ons,
said to
and
Jeddah,
to come to the
which I
podium
believe
with
is
your
in
carry-ons and your
Saudi
boarding
Arabia.
pass
You can
to
fly a
check
long
all
way
the
here
ways to
from
the final
Washington.
destination, absolutely free of charge. You will not pay a single penny to check in your carry-ons.
I may have to move in a little bit because this guy's going to
Use the
be
full
making
flight.
announcements, and
Thank
I
you.
don't want that. Oh, I think he might be done. Good. So the Lions, if the 49ers want to beat the Lions, which they obviously do, and there might be a playoff showdown between San Francisco and Detroit, it's not as much about winning a shootout against the Lions as it is making sure the Lions just don't take over the game on the ground. You have to give yourself a chance to beat Detroit by not having them run all over you and control the clock in that way. And that was the 49ers' biggest weakness before the trade deadline. And they hope that it's no longer the biggest weakness. They hope that they were, just a rotational piece away from pushing that run defense up from number 20 or so to around number 14 or number 13. If they can do that, and they could play opportunistic football, which we know that they have the tools to do with guys like Fred Warner, obviously guys like Nick Bosa have generated a lot of takeaways. They think that they can emulate the second half of that NFC Championship game last year much more closely than the first half. The first half of that game was not pretty for the 49ers, where Detroit ran all over them. So it was about making marginal improvements, if you're the 49ers, in run defense, which has been their biggest weakness, I think, for 2 seasons now. They hope that Khalil Davis is a player that can help them do that. And with that, they hope that the domino effect of better run defense, which obviously leads to better game control, which can obviously now pair too with other additions the 49ers are making, like Christian McCaffrey. And we'll see if Dre Greenlaw comes back next week or in 2 or 3 weeks. The 49ers hope that all these things together can give them the boost that they need to turn in a very good second half of the season and be better positioned to take on a team like the Lions, who they already beat last year in the NFC Championship game. All the while, the 49ers have been able to keep their 2025 draft capital. I'll read through the picks that the 49ers are projected to have in the 2025 draft, because Khalil Davis only cost them a 2026 seventh rounder. So the 49ers are looking at potentially 11 picks in the 2025 draft. Round 1, round 2, round 3, a compensatory third round pick. That was for the D'Amico Ryans departure to the Texans, whom they just traded with. Round 4, a round 4 compensatory selection for Chase Young, who they acquired via trade, but were able to recoup a pick when he signed with New Orleans for $13 million. So that Chase Young acquisition ended up being essentially free for the 49ers, just a 3 versus 4 comp pick for San Francisco, and then Young signed elsewhere. Round 5, round 6, round 7, and then 2 comp picks in the 7th round, one for the departure of Cleveland Farrell, one for the departure of Ray McLeod in free agency. Those 2 players, those are projected picks for Young, Farrell, and McLeod. We won't know the end of the compensatory formula until much later. So the 49ers might have 10, might have 11 picks in the 2025 NFL draft. And as we've seen already through the success of this 2024 draft class, the way to build and sustain a team, especially at this point of its arc, with so many star players under contract and the salary cap obviously a looming issue, you have to hit on your draft picks. And the draft is like throwing up a bunch of darts up against the wall. You have to give yourself multiple chances, because not everybody is going to be a hit. So maintaining picks in 2025 was a big-time 49ers goal. They've successfully done that with this trade that only gave up a 2026 7th rounder. And they've also recognized that they already have potentially the best roster in football. A lot of guys were just hurt. So they improved the roster by adding Khalil Davis, a rotational defensive tackle, at a very low cost. And now they can have all pros and MVP caliber players like Christian McCaffrey return. This was always the way that the 49ers were going to operate at this deadline. If you fell for rumors that they might get Tyreek Hill, you were fooled. This is how the 49ers have operated year after year at the deadline. They're extremely aggressive, but they're aggressive in ways that have proven to be smart. And I would say that that was the strategy again here, with Khalil Davis coming over to San Francisco for the 2026 7th round pick. All right, we went 30 minutes. I think that's good. I'm going to make another video right now from the airport. Maybe I could go into one of the lounges and make a solid video here from Dulles, because I've got some graphics that I want to prepare for you regarding Khalil Davis, the 49ers' new defensive tackle. So hit that subscribe button. We'll talk to everybody very soon.